What is up, folks? Welcome back to the Repertoire podcast. I'm here with my friend Ray DeLucci for another episode of, I would call this a repertoire report. This is where we go into some news stories and articles and lessons, even like posts on X or YouTube videos that Ray and I just kind of take some lessons from and ideally distill it down into something that you can use in your day-to-day life, in your work, in a way that improves your repertoire. So Ray, how are you? I'm going to throw it over to you for the first story because I think, again, you have one more story than I brought to the table
Good
today.
man. Whoa, voice crack. Good to be back. Starting off strong already. But no, doing well, and I am excited to be here, chat. And a story that I thought was timely, or just you could maybe speak to, is this article from Bloomberg that came out on July 21st, so yesterday of recording this podcast. And basically, the title is How YouTube is Shaping a New Generation of Chefs. And the subtext is in kitchens around the world, chefs are turning to YouTube to learn new skills and establish their culinary reputations. And they start with this example of James Lowe, the London-based chef who'd made Lyle's one of the best UK restaurants. So basically, he goes on to say how he kind of needed help because he had never butchered a bluefin tuna. Basically, he went ahead and learned on YouTube how to do it, and he used YouTube as a way to teach not only himself but his staff on how to butcher the fish. So then Bloomberg does a really nice job, I think, of going through and just kind of like taking the past to the present. Like they look at Julia Childs in the '60s as like the original, not YouTube chef, but content creator for like how-to videos. But something that stood out to me was the monthly uploads of food and drink videos that they share. Basically, these have shot up from 171,000 in January 2024 to 315,000 in June 2025. In a 2023 post on its Culture and Trends channel, YouTube attributed 80 billion views in the first 11 months of the year to videos from street food heavyweights such as Roy Choi of Los Angeles-based Kogi Barbecue. So like videos such as that. And basically, the article doesn't come at it as a sense of like, oh, like people are using it to get views. Well, there is some of that like popularity rising, but more so it's becoming a place where people are learning through culinary school. They're in lieu of a culinary school, they're kind of building their chef repertoire, as we would say here, and being able to just kind of establish themselves as chefs, or at least their reputations, or learning through a very easy way. And they're actually thinking that YouTube may soon be eclipsed. They're thinking that TikTok is even going to be something where a lot of the next generation of chefs are going to find out how to carve or how to, butcher a fish, how to make a hollandaise. So like when I was reading this, I thought it was interesting for two things. Like obviously you being pretty successful on YouTube and having, both the reviews, the dining out pieces, the how-tos, the more operations based stuff. Like you obviously can speak to that. What I wonder and what I've often questioned, this is like a culinary school conversation and then just a conversation in general. If you can, it's always this idea of like, you need to go to what restaurants in order to be a great chef. If you're able to service as a private chef or just service as a content creator chef, and you can learn from YouTube and then reenact those dishes or learn that and then create your own small private chef business, like we talked about 2 weeks ago, like you almost skip the restaurant portion of that. You almost skip the culinary school portion of that. So it's almost like there's branching paths in the food industry for a chef where it's like, obviously there's a lot of diversity, but if you're like looking at a chef, as we know, is in a restaurant or a creator, there's the go work in restaurants, go to culinary school, learn all those and apply it to your content and to how you're on YouTube, or use YouTube, use TikTok and online free media to build your career and your reputation while also learning consistently. So just your thoughts on this idea of the insanely, the growing popularity of not only food content, but people utilizing it to get a culinary education.
I love this story. I was taking notes as you were chatting here. So the first dot point that I wrote down was traditional culinary schools, even books to a certain extent. There was two almost hurdles that either prevented people from using those as resources or that allowed those, let's call them institutions, scapegoat culinary schools as an example here, which was like they arbitraged information or knowledge. And so it was this idea that in order to learn this, it was gate kept behind. You and I both went to CIA, and it was like if you want to learn about these techniques, if you want to work with this type of, equipment, if you want to get these insights from these professors, you have to go to this physical location and then along the way pay tens of thousands of dollars to get this. And they made a ton of money on that arbitrage, because where else were you going to get that information in an era when spreading that knowledge, publishing, quote unquote, was not widely accessible to the masses, number one. And what I want to add as a caveat there that I think is really, really important, I can imagine you experienced this too at culinary school, Ray, was there's a difference between like information and experience. And I think sometimes people have those examples or anecdotes when it's like, well, knowledge or wisdom is the confluence of both of those things together. We can debate that in the comments maybe. But what I want to caution people against, and I say this in all of our programs too that we have on the website, is just because we give you the information, it is not a substitute for experience. And you really, really, really need to keep that in mind as you watch somebody make a really beautiful biryani, or somebody teaches you how to make tacos al pastor, or someone teaches you this cool pastry technique. And it's like you've seen it, but in a lot of these contexts, when they're showing you this with this flashy cinematography and it's edited together, and maybe they've taken out some of the blunders or mistakes, or they don't even talk about those mistakes, because I know as a budding content creator myself, I did not want to be seen as someone who didn't have quote unquote the answers. And so if I messed up on camera, I was for sure going to edit that out and make sure that you only saw the pristine example of, whatever it is that I was creating. And I kind of documented the process when I was doing like dish of the day stuff, when I would, at the end of the dish, when I would present it in two ways. I would say, I don't know what the right answer is for whatever I just did. Is it this one or is it this one? I don't necessarily know. And then, I kind of use that in a little way to get engagement, but it was almost to transparently and vulnerably talk about the fact that just because I made this thing doesn't mean it's finished. And so you got to really be careful as you're watching some of these channels to take the right lessons away, which leads me into the next point that I wrote down as you were going on that rant was, just-in-time information versus just-in-case information. And so you might have, a collaboration coming up where a Japanese chef is going to come to the restaurant and they're going to collaborate with you on the menu. And you're like, oh man, I know nothing about, the type of Japanese cuisine that this person specializes in. I think it's amazing that you can go on the internet and go to YouTube University and basically get at least a basic 101 understanding of, how rice is seasoned, or how to slice fish, or, insert Japanese pickling, or like insert the topic. That I think is really, really awesome. And it kind of leads into that experience idea where just because you have the 101 understanding doesn't mean you are now an expert, or you now have the ability to, again, to your point, that could be the just-in-time information piece. So as an example, just to make it really concrete for people, you might spend a stint working at, a, fast casual, or maybe like a little bit more upscale sit-down Italian spot, and you have desires to do that in people's homes. Can you actually take a little bit of insights from some YouTube videos that you're going to watch and then have those be the thing that ultimately give you at least a base to get your first few clients? And then you can use that. Like, you almost want to combine it with other things is maybe what I'm trying to say. Don't look at this, these educational YouTube videos in isolation and say, cool, don't need you, middle finger to this. I'm just going to do it on my own. Because it kind of turns into this thing where you get what you pay for, and I'm not even talking about that from a financial sense. It's like if you don't, that's why we use the language pay your dues in some way, shape, or form, because that's like proof of work almost. When you go into these environments and you're forced to think on your feet and you get pushed outside of your comfort zone, that's actually where the learning happens, and that's where the experience comes into play. And it is this funny thing where you see this sometimes with like these recipe apps or these recipe libraries that people get asked, access to. You get all of the recipes downloaded onto your phone, and it's like, cool, does that give you the ability to open a concept now? Not necessarily, right? Like, there's still a bunch of other things that you have to, tackle there. I also am kind of giving myself like a pseudo pat on the back, because there was a time, I don't know, man, this was like 2017, right? As I was coming back from Europe, where I was like, man, everybody's telling me if I'm going to make content on YouTube, I should do recipes. And I saw it from the jump that it was going to be a commodity. It was going to turn into this thing where everybody, because the information is like, it is a recipe. There is, by definition, a structured way to do it, and all you have to do is follow the instructions. And that's not to downplay the process that goes into making some of these videos, because I know it's super hard. I've had seasons where I've made recipe-style content before. It's not easy. But it turns into this thing where people either have to get attached to your personality, you have to have incredible tenacity and persistence to show up and make that kind of content to have a successful channel, Or you got to like fold it into something else. Like you see the Joshua Weissmans of the world, like he has 2 channels now for those that aren't aware. He has his main channel where it's almost like Josh's cooking travel series where he'll go and try all the different chicken sandwiches around the US. And now he has a Joshua Weissman's recipe channel because he realized that like these are 2 very different, like needs and audiences. And even when we look in our YouTube dashboard, there's a whole tab now called inspiration where we can click into it and people can say, these are topics that people are searching for, but they aren't being served enough, which I think also ties into this idea we've covered on the show before of why does traditional culinary school education have to start with classic French cuisine? And it's like, this is maybe the antidote to that. It's like the CIAs of the world are not going to totally rejig their curriculum. Yeah. So can you supplement whatever you're getting with something else from something like YouTube? And then the last thing I'll kind of tie it up with a bow here is like, what do you do with all of this information now? And that's why we call both the show and the company Repertoire, because it's this idea of like, you can have stuff in your repertoire and know how to do it, but it is context dependent what you decide to whip out and use. And I think that's the important piece here, where you can almost have this information overload and you'll be like, I know how to do so many things. And that actually makes it paradoxically hard to decide what you're going to do, instead of just, like digging your heels in a little bit and saying, I'm going to become really, really, really good at this thing that I know the market wants, that I know has the potential to be profitable, that I know I can actually deliver on. That to me is the more interesting insight. I don't know. What did you think after, you've come up with some of this culinary education too?
Yeah. I agree with you. And I think like I've done some reflecting. I'm now at a point where, let's see, 17, 20. I'm probably 50-50 on my time spent working in restaurants as compared to spending in like food manufacturing and R&D. And I can tell you that the 5 years I spent, or 7 years, I don't know, the length of time I spent from working at Wendy's in high school to working for restaurants during the middle of COVID, like that time has served me so well and jumpstarted and enhanced my ability so well in food manufacturing and R&D in a way that like if I didn't have it, there'd be so many things that I think I'd be bad at or not like be as proficient at. So like I agree, you need that experience in some way. It doesn't have to be like, and I've said this a ton of times, it doesn't have to be in like a fine dining restaurant, but I do think you need that experience. I think the other thing, like if you're going to start a food business based off of your knowledge of YouTube, is like, that's all great that like you learn recipes, but I think food safety is a big thing that isn't touched in a lot of these recipe videos. They're cool. You're
managing people is not covered.
Like, if you do a private chef gig and it's just you, like, do you understand how to cook all this right temperature? Do you understand how to keep it cold? Do you understand how to like make sure it's safe when you like, so all of that stuff, and like that's all important too. But I just think it's interesting because I think we're gonna sit here and say that, but I think there's gonna be a lot of people that take the route of finding that experience and just going through YouTube. And I'm not downplaying them. Like I think however people can be entrepreneurial in the food space, like obviously go for it. But it's just gonna be interesting to see. I think it's gonna create like too many industries in like the next 10 years. We'll see what happens.
I think an interesting way to think about it is you have to pay for that experience in some way, shape, or form. I have a hard time thinking of examples where there's no way around it. So just as an example, I get really excited about Moroccan cuisine, and I'm going to go down a YouTube rabbit hole and I'm going to watch all the stuff and I'm going to open my own place. A way to potentially thought exercise this for yourself is, if I go work for somebody else who has even a tangentially related concept, it doesn't have to be exactly the cuisine that you're doing. You might not think of it in the moment, but you're getting paid to learn those lessons. And that is drastically different from you taking out a line of credit from a bank, asking for money from friends and family to, invest in your concept that might, potentially faceplant. And I think experience gets this bad rap sometimes because it takes time. In this world of, you've covered this on the show multiple times, like GLP-1s, the pill that's going to make you more focused, the sleep hack that's going to, revolutionize your health. It's like there's a shortcutness to it all. And I think that is so alluring to people where it's like, oh man, I don't have to spend 8 years doing XYZ thing. Yeah. And what I just want people to be aware of is the fact that there actually are benefits to the quote unquote old way. And you have to kind of acknowledge some of the side effects that come with this quote unquote new way that I don't think we've technically seen. And then I reflect on, I don't know if you're familiar with, did you watch the Avicii documentary?
No, it's on my list. I'm terrible at watching things, as you probably know.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I'm actually probably going to butcher this as I attempt to take my lessons away from this, but he is very much so a product of the internet, from his ability to take like, music samples and stuff that he found online that was relatively open source and the software that was available at the time. And he was basically like, no, I don't need to go to the traditional path of a music artist. And I can basically like build my name, quote unquote, online. And I think the important thing for chefs to take away from this is like music scales in a way that food does not. But I do think regardless of how it looks, I do think that this next generation is looking and saying, I have different options. And even if they're able to achieve, a 30% quote unquote time savings on their career and get to a profitable ownership state, that's awesome. I'm going to applaud that. I just want to caution and make sure that we're not having that Chesterton's fence problem that I've covered in previous shows where, you see an established guideline and you're like, I don't need this. And then you circumnavigate it and find that it was actually there for a reason.
I hear you.
All good. All right, so my next story, I wanted to talk about the Travis Kalanick appearance on the All In podcast. And he comes on the show multiple times throughout the year. I think he's done appearances on the summit that they do. For those that don't know, Travis was the founder of Uber, and then he had some kind of tumultuous times at the company. And now he is focused on not technically the Uber side of things, but he has a company called Cloud Kitchens, which I think was a really clever way to capitalize on that IP of that language becoming popular. But then he also has a company called Lab Robotics. And so I really wanted to dig into just some findings that I took away from his appearance on this podcast, and then some lessons that we can potentially distill for either operators who are kind of dipping their toes into this idea of automated food systems and infrastructure in their business, or actually a really valuable takeaway that I found that doesn't impact restaurants as much as I thought when we think about food automation. And so for those that, I'll just give a very quick TLDW summary of the demo that he gave, which was they're thinking of basically having a conveyor belt robot installed in a warehouse, a cloud kitchen, so to speak. And when given prepped food items, it can basically do the whole assembly, get it in a bag with utensils into a locker so that a delivery driver can just go wave their phone in front of a locker and the door that the meal is housed in opens, and that delivery driver grabs that food item, puts it into their car, and then drives to the destination.
Okay.
And he gave some really interesting examples where he says the mission of Lab Robotics is infrastructure for better food. And he talked about the real importance of end-to-end automation when it comes to autonomous infrastructure inside of food businesses. And he gave this hilarious example, which was instead of one guy making pizzas, these robotics companies came in and they said, we have a robot that makes pizzas. And because it wasn't end-to-end and full stack with the entire process of order comes in, delivery needs to be fulfilled, what he says you landed on was instead of one guy making pizzas, you have two guys, because one guy needs to be on one side of the robot feeding in ingredients, and then the other guy needs to be on the other side of the robot getting the cooked pizzas and putting them into boxes and getting them to the delivery drivers. He said you have two guys and a $1 million machine in the middle of them making pizzas, which I think is so freaking true at the state of robotics in kitchens, and it's one of the reasons why it hasn't quite yet caught on yet. In addition to all the complexities that are required with dexterity and measuring and, all of these other things. So he has some interesting language that he used that I hadn't quite heard before in this vertical, so to speak. And so one is, we call it cooking. So you take a chicken breast and it goes from a raw marinated chicken breast to all of a sudden being, ready to serve. You might actually be more up on this than I am, Ray, but he called it state change, which is really interesting. So it's like there's a state change step of the process where we're taking something from, like raw to cooked. And I was like, that's an interesting way to kind of like vernacular change how we're talking about these things.
Yeah.
And then he also talks about a stage of the process being assembly, which I think most of us can kind of, intuit. But what's awesome about this system is it dispenses the bowls. It dispenses exactly to the gram, however many, grams of chickpeas need to be in this, bowl that you're making. He shared some really interesting industry stats. Still, even at this age of, we think DoorDash has saturated everything and delivery apps on your phone are offering this unprecedented convenience, he says, still, quote, 85% of all meals are still at home. And the majority of those 85% are still made at home, which I think is just, kind of, we can take off our horse blinders for a second and say, wow, people are still eating at home a lot. He also shares the stat that only 1.8% of meals are DoorDash, Uber Eats, those types of meals.
No,
Like in the scope of,
that's wild.
humans eat 3 meals a
It would have been
day,
a lot
those
bigger.
types of things.
I thought that would have been.
I thought it
bigger.
would have been higher too. And that totally surprised me. And this is a quote from his interview. I haven't fact checked this just to
He's lying.
put that caveat in it.
Okay.
He's lying. So here, interesting takeaways. One was owning the stack is going to be super, super, super important. So I think that puts me in a headspace of, okay, unless you see a competitor who is genuinely doing that, like from the order being brought in all the way through the assembly, custom fit things, actually being able to have the assembly lines and the prep lead into the assembly robot, so to speak. It's not that we don't need to be worried about them, but it might not be economically feasible with the way that certain things cost right now for them to actually usurp your business from a competitor standpoint. Number two, he talked about this idea of we can take labor costs from, he says, in cloud kitchens right now, in the traditional sense of how they're running them, labor costs is anywhere from 30 to 35%. And he said, with this autonomous end-to-end process with automation, we can drive those costs down to 7 to 10%. And even that as a concept, whether it's true or not, again, we need to see how this plays out when it actually hits scale.
Yeah.
Actually, if people end up, supply and demand. But that is a gargantuan savings that I don't tell me another way that people are going to be able to hit that. It's really hard to argue, the other side of how we're going to be able to cut costs down in that way. And now you might wonder, does that mean it's coming from my job? Which also I kept very top of mind as I was listening to this conversation. He had a real flip that changed my mind on this. And he said, if we have the ability to drive costs down that much, the current iteration of the machines that they have can churn out 300 bowls an hour, which is not nothing, but it's not a gargantuan amount of food. But at the same time, it's all you have to do is either have multiple of them, or you have to, decrease the cost on the actual production of the machine. And now it's, starting to become really, really compelling.
Yeah.
His idea was you don't have to be wealthy to eat healthy, which kind of flows on to some of the stories you've been talking about with GLP-1 stuff. And I know that we've had some pushback in the comments that I think you've covered, which is, why do I, as the chef at a restaurant, have to be accommodating in this capacity? And what this interview really drew to mind for me was maybe this takes a little bit of that onus off of restaurants in some way, shape, or form. Because, take aside the context where that person needs to come to dinner with a group or, one of those potential reasons. But as we think about the majority of the meals that person is eating, they might end up being covered by a full stack automated solution like this. And then the other really important point that he shared was, so the first one is you are going to be able to get tailor-made food with your dietary restrictions in mind. Maybe it's not even a restriction. Maybe it's I need this meal to have 50 grams of protein in it, and I'm going to be able to request that. And it's not going to cost $45 for me to get that delivered. It's going to be $17. We're going to be back in a state of what we were used to pre-pandemic from a pricing perspective because of how costs were able to be driven down, which leads into the fascinating implication of these infrastructure plays are not coming for restaurants, they're coming for grocery stores. Because if you think about it, if I can pay the same amount, the meme on Twitter, I think at least, is why would I buy all the ingredients for pad thai when I can just, I spent $40 to do the ingredients for pad thai, or I could do $27 to order pad thai from my favorite Thai place? That is actually the problem now, is that grocery stores are now the actual person who's going to be at risk here. Because with food costs going up from a just raw product perspective and the grocery stores need to make their margin, now we're really in a pickle, because why would I go and, it's a time saving thing now, because now I can pay the exact as it would be to get the raw ingredients, and I don't have to spend the time to actually cook it myself. Oh my goodness, now this is a huge unlock. And what are some of the other implications that come from this with, I know Blue Apron kind of had a boom and a bust with getting prepped ingredients, so to speak, delivered to your place. But, he talks about this idea of people love cooking at home. Is there a world where we could, get an 80% ready to eat meal delivered to somebody's house, and they actually do the final things at home because we were able to get so many of the steps of the process? Maybe the meat is already braised and we have the pasta ready to go, and all you need to do is just kind of heat up the sauce and the braised meat and the, pasta together. And now it's like you have a pretty compelling meal at home for a fraction of the cost of what you're used to from some of these delivery companies. And so we'll link the full interview. It's in the first 15 minutes of the podcast. They talk about a bunch of other stuff in startup and tech land in the rest of it. But I thought it was just a really interesting, like my ears perked up when I was listening to this because I, one, didn't think it was going to come for grocery stores. I hadn't quite done that math in my head. And two, this idea of what happens in a world where we can drastically reduce the cost of meals, not just from a financial perspective, but how much time humans are spending cooking on what he talks about is that 85%. This is not replacing restaurants. We still will want to go out to eat in those places where we're going to experience hospitality. But man, I was just struck by some of the implications of this.
Yeah, it reminds me of actually in Naperville here, a Sweet Green's Infinity Kitchen. I don't know
Yes,
if you've
we have one of those in Seattle too.
yeah.
I haven't been to one
Mhm.
yet. I don't know if you have been.
Yeah, I've been there. I mean, and I think back to your labor thing, I mean, they still have 5, 7 employees back there making sure everything runs. It's just like the friction of the longer tasks, I think that it does is like helping with that. And I'm sure it saves on labor. But yeah, it just reminds me of that. And yeah, I agree with you. Like 300 portions doesn't sound like a large amount, but if that's like, I mean, that's a lot of customers. That's more than a restaurant may cover in a single night. Like is a sizable amount. I would say that like with food automation, like there is a lot of progress, but I do think we overstate where it's at. I do think that you still need a ton of manual labor in the food industry. I don't see it as one of the more AI ridden or automation driven spaces. You'd be surprised at how many large companies still rely on manual labor because food is so finicky and tricky to get right. So yeah, I think anything that takes us a step towards that automation is interesting, but at the same time, it's also interesting to see how like you still will need labor in a sense. And regarding diner expectations, yeah, I mean, with costs of things going up, I do think the preparedness of a meal is what people want, whether or not it's cooked or they just simply have to cook different things for themselves. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see where it goes. And obviously, he's someone who's shaken up an industry before. So if his sights are set on like food automation, then obviously it's something to be watching out for.
Well, and he talks about the idea of the infrastructure needing to be built because he said with Uber, it was so clear to see that the roads as an infrastructure piece were already built for cars to drive on. And a large swath of people had cars that weren't used 95% of the day. And so Uber had a really easy, straightforward go to market, quote unquote, strategy. And of course, it was difficult to implement, but like it wasn't actually like the pipes, quote unquote, were missing to get this up and off the ground. Whereas with this endeavor, it certainly is. And I think what's nice about it is they've run the numbers to show that this makes sense. And they're thinking about it in a way that is not what you're talking about with the Sweet Green Infinite Kitchen, where you look around and you're like, okay, this is, like we've gone from 6 people to 5 people. It's like, it's just not enough. Like we need to save more in order for this massive infrastructure and CapEx to actually pay off for us.
Yeah.
So what do you got?
Well, this kind of fits into that. Food and Wine had an article out. This came out today as I was looking through. It was how chefs are getting scrappy to open restaurants in a more expensive world. I feel like a lot of the, I think we're hitting the mid-year point. What's interesting to me is the National Restaurant Association usually has their restaurant performance index like a month back. So like if we were looking at the end of July now, you would see June's progress. It isn't updated yet, so I'm waiting to see that data because I'm interested to see how June has revolved because I think there's a lot of economic indicators that you would see with everything going on with the economy. But I thought this was an interesting article because it kind of toys with the idea that like opening a restaurant is so much more expensive. They talk about Zachary Engel. He's a chef here in Chicago. He was first named one of the nation's top emerging chefs by the James Beard Foundation in 2017. So basically, he holds a Michelin star. He was a James Beard finalist this year, and they jumped at an opportunity to lease a building next to them in Lincoln Park, next to their restaurant Galet, and so it's Cafe Yaya. I don't know if you've heard of them.
It was the one place my wife and I were. We had plans to go to Cafe Yaya for breakfast on our morning leaving Chicago last month. And unfortunately, we didn't make it because I think like traffic was bad and we needed to like get on the road to go home. And so it was disheartening because that was the one place on my list that I was like, I was gung ho to go. Not because I wanted to talk about this story, but I think just because it's been hyped and not everybody, but like a lot of people have said good things. And so I was pumped to go. And unfortunately, I have to say no when you ask me that question.
Yeah, it's on my list as well. Living next to Chicago, I actually don't get to the city as much as I'd like. But it in this article, he says it costs $3 million to get off the ground. And their budget was 2 million, so it cost them an extra $1 million to get off the ground, just to due to how high of a cost it is to open a restaurant, especially in a city like Chicago. So this is the Food and Wine goes on to say the increase in opening and operating costs doesn't come from one single source. The restaurateurs estimate that the prices of kitchen equipment have risen around 50% in the past 5 years. Costs of utilities are going up. Obviously, labor is going up. Food costs going up. And according to a survey conducted by restaurantowner.com, the median cost of opening a restaurant in 2018 could range from $175,000 to $750,000 in 2025. Toast estimates that the average cost could be anywhere from $95,000 to over $2 million. Obviously, this is $3 million. Obviously, Chicago is an exception probably for how expensive it is. But then Food and Wine goes on to kind of talk about a couple different ways that chefs are kind of like working within the cost, or like, and this goes back to like I've been thinking and pontificating a lot about like the future of chefs, and so make a mobile kitchen is one of their things. I have actually was vaguely aware of this, but I wasn't in Buffalo much in the 2020s. But Chef Jordan Baldoff, he worked in Michigan, but then he launched a New York themed pop up in 2020, or it's called Side Biscuit. It was in Buffalo, and basically mixed chicken wings and flaky biscuits. They were pretty popular. But rather than open a permanent location, he's going mobile. He's bought a 400 square foot food trailer, and it's stationary back in Ann Arbor. So it's pretty interesting. Like he kind of opened up. It was mobile, went back to Michigan, has been doing a lot of sales. They then talk about how private dining might be more sustainable, and they highlight a chef out in New Orleans. How they went and made a supper club instead of opening a restaurant. And then they just kind of talk about like higher labor costs, ingredient prices being volatile. But this idea of the mobile kitchen, this idea of private supper clubs, this idea of just kind of new ways of getting around the cost and overhead of opening a restaurant, it's very akin to me as to the home ownership crisis we have in the U.S. How if you don't have a lot of money, it's very difficult for you to purchase a home, so you have to like rent or find different ways of getting to that goal. And I think the same is going to be happening for restaurants, where unless you have a lot of capital or a lot of startup capital, it's going to be next to impossible soon to actually open a restaurant. So what different things can you do to either build revenue, or if you run a successful business like a mobile pop-up or a private dining supper club somewhere that like drops into different restaurants or spaces, and that business is generating you revenue and a solid income, do you not just expand that business rather than go the way of opening a restaurant? So just your thoughts on this idea again of the evolution of chefs in 2025, where things are just kind of becoming next to impossible unless you have a lot of capital to open up a restaurant.
I was going to get really heady and try to pontificate on trends and all this stuff, but to be honest, Ray, what I did was I tried to transport myself back to like when I was coming out of fine dining kitchens, and I was at that crossroads where a lot of my peers were like, okay, it's time to open a restaurant. We're going to go find investors and we're going to do that thing. I tried to ask myself the question just now, like, why did I push back on that? Why did I go into pop-ups was the question that I tried to ask myself just then. And to be honest, if I really, really reflect on it, it's because I didn't know how to do the next part. And I think that is really important for somebody to just pause and reflect on for themselves. It's like, I talk about skills a lot. Raising money is a skill.
Yeah.
Putting together a business plan is a skill. Getting investors together, wrangling a team, coming up with a concept, all the operational nitty-gritty stuff. Like I'm so thankful that I was able to like do the event production business especially going into COVID, because it was like I got the experience of scaling the business, like starting the business, scaling the business, and then navigating crisis in the business that I had it was such a trial by fire for me. And it really opened my eyes to the fact that like you can get better at every single element of what's required. We can break it down as granularly as you want. Like the way you write an email to a customer that is upset with you is something you can improve on and get better at. And I thought to myself, as a lot of people I can imagine that are in this set of shoes think to themselves, or they're also getting told this by the people in their world, is like, dude, you are chef de cuisine at XYZ place. You are so good at cooking. The next natural step for you is to start your own thing. Not realizing that there is this giant chasm in between you and, getting to that place. And the way you can test this for yourself is look at the restaurant groups that are opening location after location after location. It's like, how are they able to do it in this way? It's because they've developed the skill and they just know how to do it. Not just they have the infrastructure from a systems perspective. Yes, they're using that. But it's like so many of those mistakes and like bad ideas just ended up on the drawing room floor. Like they didn't even try that stuff. They just went for the stuff that just time tested is going to work for them. And they're just able to crush it when they step up to bat every single time. And you look at that and you're like, what do they have that I don't? It's like, if you really pause and ask yourself, like, are there skills here that I'm missing? I think you'll realize that there probably is.
Yeah.
And even going to your example of like, when you're thinking about putting together a build out plan and you're like, okay, cool. I'm going to do it differently than anybody else. I'm going to keep my costs low. It's like, what the better people do is they just understand that they're probably going to have to budget, like add a little bit of cushion on top of it. And they're going to have to raise money in advance to account for that. And so you laid out this example of like, was that bad budgeting, or was that exactly what you need to expect with, we thought it was going to be 2 million and it was 3 million. That's a 50% increase on what we were potentially expecting. Maybe that's up for debate. But I think, if I'm really being honest, like you have to take into consideration some of the stories that we've covered in the past with like Daniel Patterson doing the pop-ups in anticipation. And that is an example of a story where he has the concept, he has the infrastructure ready to go. It's just taking time because permits are taking a little bit of extra, length. I, again, pause for myself because I lived this, which is the reason I didn't do a restaurant coming out of the gate is because I wasn't prepared enough. I wasn't skilled enough. I didn't have the experience to be able to confidently enter something like that and know that the money I raised was not just going to be lit on fire and torched, because I needed to learn those skills, quote unquote, on the job of being a business owner for the first time. And so what I got immense more value from was partnering up with someone who was bringing sales in the door. And so it's like I didn't have to worry about that side of things. I could focus on the management and the operation side. And then I felt like, like now, if you ask me to open a restaurant, I'm so much more prepared. I'm not going to yet, but I think it is something that like I still had more to learn. And when you see yourself, quote unquote, at the top of your game culinarily, it's very difficult for you to admit to yourself that you're lacking again, because you don't want to be in those shoes. You want to just be the person who is like, I just want to stand at the pass and watch my check come in every month. And it's not always how it works.
Yeah, and I also just wonder, like, I think like we've been talking about this like reframing of what a chef's career is. It's like, yeah, like, is a restaurant what you need? Like for me, it's like goes back to that home ownership versus renting. Like, yeah, a house would be nice, but do you have the finances to do that? Do you need a new car, or is your car fine? And I think you applied to your career. It's like, can I get away with pop-up dinners, and can I get away with working in a food truck, or working with mobile catering, or working with private dining opportunities? I've had this restaurant experience. It's something I want to pursue, create my own brand, create my own vision. Do I need the restaurant space right away, or are there other ways I can accomplish feeding people, building my reputation, driving income, and getting myself on the right foot financially before I actually go and take on large amounts of debt or large amounts of investment? So I think it's just it's a reframing, because I think at the end of the day, like you just said, like it's a lot of money, and I think it's going to start to become more of a luxury to be able to just go open your first restaurant. So how can you build up to that? Because I Jerk at Night was a food truck that then opened restaurant location in DC back in 2020, I think around that time when I was there, and I interviewed them on Line Cook Thoughts, and yeah, like they had like a couple food trucks before they opened up their first restaurant. Started on a college dorm, and out of a college dorm, and it was on a college campus, and then I went around the DC area. Like, it's just those different ways of getting to the end goal, and I think that that's going to be the pathway for more and more people before they just open a restaurant. So
it's also, you experience this grass is always greener effect too with any of these iterations, where you say, oh, I have this fleet of food trucks and I'm not tied down to one physical location. That's awesome. But then it's like, hey, the restaurant owner's looking at you and saying, I don't have to worry about truck maintenance, dude. So it's like there's all sorts of again, it's grass is always greener.
Yeah.
So That it's so funny, man. I think that we like flip-flopped personas for this episode because I think that your story there was one I probably would have brought, and this one I'm gonna share is I think like more of a Ray story than a Justin story, if I'm being honest. It's from this company called Pipe Dream,
Okay.
and they're at pipedream_labs on X. And the founder did this fascinating presentation on what they basically have planned for the rest of 2025. And I wanted to kind of break down who Pipe Dream Labs is, how they're basically going to what the implications are with food and food delivery. And so here's the TLDR. Pipe Dream Labs is building infrastructure for what they're calling sub 10-minute delivery for less than $1. So a lot of people are probably used to just the current state of things, which is some locker systems, but mostly like the traditional DoorDash infrastructure of, you need a human in a vehicle to come to the door and pick up the bag with their own 2 human hands, walk it back to the car. They maybe need to sit in traffic, and you're used to seeing that 55 minutes to get this delivered to your house. Or when we're thinking about something like Amazon or even like Instacart with like 2-day shipping, sub 10-minute delivery for less than $1, pretty compelling. So how are they going to do this? They talk about the fact that the infrastructure is needed, very similar to this lab robotics story that I covered first. And it's being built right now. So the first test city that they're doing it is in Austin. It is 40 miles of underground pipes. And so what they're using is what they call HDPE pipes, just like the ones used in water mains.
Okay.
And what's cool about building this infrastructure is that you don't need to tear up a road to put these pipes into place. And that's why they're using these specific types of pipes, because water mains have the same function, basically, where you can install these things without needing to tear up any asphalt or concrete. And so what basically happens is these pipes have these robots inside of them. They call them otters. And so these otters travel through the pipes at over 100 miles an hour, and they can currently carry up to 60 pounds of payload, basically.
Okay.
And so I think it might actually be more than 60 pounds, but they give the example of like a 60-pound bag of dog food can go into one of these robots. It's like it actually looks like the tray that you put the silverware in that goes into the dish machine. It's like one of those plastic, like very short containers. And then the otter has these 2, like capsules that close over the top of the container. And it has like little wheels that go on the, inside the pipe, and then 2 headlights on it. And so these cars are just like zipping through these pipe systems.
Yeah.
And then once they get to whatever that destination is, they rise up into what they call portals.
Okay.
And so they're going to have different types of portals for who's going to be on the receiving end of one of those deliveries. And so one example they gave is drones, which is another infrastructure piece that needs to be built out. One is self-driving cars. And so all these things are starting to get like shipping ready, consumer ready, all at the same time.
Okay.
And so we have Travis's food building assembly robots. We have the pipe infrastructure with the delivery, otters zipping around. We also have drones and self-driving cars all coming online at the same time. And so Pipe Dream Labs is trying to basically be ahead of this. And so they deliver to these portals for pennies. And they had a couple different other language pieces similar to what I talked about in the lab robotics story of being state change when you're cooking something. This is a rapid fulfillment center, an RFC, where they're talking about sub 2-minute dispensing. So like once the delivery thing has arrived, it's going to take 2 minutes for that thing to go from the otter to the drone, and then it's off to its next destination.
Okay.
And what they're launching along with this in the fall, supposedly, is what they're calling a goods grocery store, which will basically offer a sub 2-minute delivery experience. So you, Ray, you need to pick up dinner on your way home. You place the order on your phone, and literally as you're waiting in line to drive up to the portal at this goods grocery store, all of this stuff is going to be assembled and brought up into the portal, or you can just reach out your hand and grab your bag and put it into your car.
Oh.
And they're also, because this infrastructure exists, they're guaranteeing that anything you order on your app is going to be in stock. Because think about the current way that things work is that you basically have to put your order in on Instacart. You have to hope that the shopper who's going to shop 4 hours from now is going to go to the grocery store, and whatever you ordered is going to still be in stock.
Yeah.
Because it's so quote unquote real time, they can offer this guarantee because it is so quick. Like the speed at which this stuff is moving is just much more predictable.
Yeah.
And they can stay on top of all of those little details. And so I don't know if you have thoughts on like we have yet to see if this is going to expand outside of Austin. If this is just going to be something that is like they build this fancy network of pipes and nobody ends up using it, or if the self-driving car side of things gets good enough, have they driven down the speed so much where it's like, it's almost trivial? So like the difference between 2-hour delivery and 2-minute delivery or 10-minute delivery is like, I don't care. Like, give me the 2-hour one.
Yeah.
And because self-driving cars can tackle that, and we have Optimus robots going into grocery stores and doing our shopping for us, we basically don't need any of this stuff. I don't know if you have thoughts on something like this existing.
Yeah. I think that, I mean, it's exciting. I think it's the future and it makes total sense. It's just for me, it's one of those like far out ideas where I think it's going to be really beneficial, but until it like gets near me, it's going to be hard to like conceptualize. Because in my mind, it's like, okay, you have these pipes in the system and whatnot. I think it makes more sense. Like for me, it makes more sense that it would be a centralized location where you go get the food rather than a pipe coming to your house. Although that at some point that might be the case. So, but you said, but like, yeah, I think if I were to give a critique as someone who's not into like, who's not an expert in urban planning, but who's worked in manufacturing and whatnot, it's like, it makes more sense that you have this super fast, reliable system that then gets out to delivery, whether it's by person or automation, that then it can be delivered. Because that's the biggest thing is like the preparedness of it. Like, yeah, delivery is going to take time, but it's really the preparing and all that. And if you cut that down, then yeah, that's a game changer for a lot of companies. So I would just like, I'll follow you and I just follow them on X, like keep myself updated with them. But yeah, I think it's something that could be really useful. It just depends on how they're able to implement it and if it's adopted.
Well, where this fuses into what we talk about on the show, and this kind of came to mind as like a closing thought or something you as a chef might take away from this, is we think of pop-ups as, okay, I was the pastry chef at a 2 Michelin star restaurant. I'm going to go open my donut place someday, and I'm going to fund it, quote unquote, by doing pop-ups, and I'm going to take over a cafe, quote unquote, on, this street corner on a day that is relatively low traffic, blah, 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 blah. There will be a world, I'm predicting it now on the show, where we actually see a citywide pop-up that is going to happen through the infrastructure that's available with some of this stuff, where it's like, I'm making stuff on a Sunday and I'm able to deliver my donuts to the entire city of Austin, as opposed to what the current pop-up experience is, which is I have to go stand in line. I have to go, like brave the, the rain to sit and wait. And I get to the front of the line and XYZ thing is not in stock anymore, because chefs are actually able to utilize some of this stuff. And because it is so low cost to deliver the stuff, you're actually able to run a profitable pop-up, which now makes doing a pop-up actually a realistic thing for you to raise money for your brick and mortar location, as opposed to doing the pop-up just to get the word out, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And then, you can fuse it with both, right? You can, out of the back of the kitchen that you're taking over, you can do the delivery stuff, but then out of the front, you're doing actually the in-person experience. You're getting to talk to customers, all of
Maybe
that
that's
stuff
my
together.
point. It's like, I almost see this as better used for the operators and the businesses rather than like a direct to consumer delivery system. So
Yeah. I love it.
I'm
Cool.
gonna cut out one story because we've kind of already covered the topics on it. So if you want to jump to yours, is it my last one's quick?
Sure.
Your last one, and then I'll go.
Yeah, cool. So this, I'm titling this little rant that I'm about to go on, Nuance in the Gloom. And so I follow this account on X called The Food Maniac, or A Food Maniac is what they go by. And the start of this story is restaurant sales in 2025 are projected to hit 1.1 trillion with a T, but don't be fooled. Most of that growth, quote unquote, is inflation. Guest traffic is down, menu prices are up, and operators are feeling the squeeze. Here's what's really happening. Fewer diners, higher checks. Operators are charging more to offset cost increases, but guests are visiting less often. Revenue might be steady, but margins and loyalty are eroding. And they go into a bunch of other insights on, you must have guests expect convenience, QR menus, app ordering, frictionless experiences. This person, was a food salesman, if I'm not mistaken.
Well,
here.
I'll just say, I will just
X.
say, like the QR menu thing, I would disagree with right off the bat because I've actually
and there's some comments that say that too.
I've actually done some work where there's the data actually shows the opposite, that customers hate QR menus. But anyway, continue.
Yep. And so the summary of this thread, it's just one long post on X. They say, winners in 2025 will engineer menus for margin and prep speed, focus on guest lifetime value over daily volume, align experience with local market needs, invest in efficiency, not just aesthetics, treat tech as a necessity, not a trend. And it feels in a way that this was maybe kind of written with AI with some of the other language in this. And what I want to fuse that with, so to speak, is this Go ahead.
No, I
Go
had that
ahead.
thought too. This isn't a downturn; it is a
Yeah, yeah,
redefinition.
yeah. That's a total AI
That's
lie,
like when I
but
asked my
sorry to say.
my AI chatbot what its thoughts are on me like not budgeting correctly, and they're like, "You're not like losing money. You're redefining how you spend it." It's like, okay, just tell me I lost money.
Yep, that's the total tell right now of AI written stuff for those that are, and that's actually really important to just side tangent really quick. If you're using AI to do things like write your cover letter, it is becoming increasingly obvious for people to see, especially like the good HR people who is using some of these tools to, like you're thinking you're standing out because you have very eloquent writing in your cover letter in a world where you didn't have it before. But now with all the AI slop that's out there, you just blend in with everybody else. And so just putting that as a
I'll say
caveat,
this,
and
I do a lot of food writing on the side for industry focused websites. Like the need for non AI writing is so big, and like
yes,
it's
huge,
just like, yeah, if you're
huge.
not doing your own writing, you're selling yourself
Yep.
short on things. But anyway,
No, so I'm fusing this with another article from Business Insider where it says fine dining in this economy. And the subtext of the article is to survive financially precarious times, high end restaurants are betting on approachable vibes. And this piece basically, to summarize, there's a couple of anecdotes that I'm bucketing under this header that I'm calling surfing the trend. And so we're seeing all of these confluencing factors with rising costs, labor's going up. The piece from Business Insider talks about this idea of people from Asia and Europe were traveling a lot less because of both the tariffs and some of the immigration policies that the government was potentially going to institute, but maybe they did, maybe they didn't, maybe they will, maybe they won't. And so if we take all of this together, the things that Food Maniac covered, Business Insider covered, some of the stuff that you might be aware of in your own business, an exercise that you might bring to your team, but even you, if you're a business owner, might ponder, if we are to agree, or maybe just hypothesize a reality where we were to build a business from square one, where every single booking, we saw our bookings in our, POS system, and we were going to say it's either their first and last time coming to the restaurant, or this is a return visit. How would we change what we do? And I think that question at its core, like it might drastically change. Like if that's the reality that we're living in, can you surf that trend?
mm-hmm.
Because I don't know if you've experienced this, Ray. Like there's certain restaurants where you save up for it, or you happen to only be in a city for a short amount of time. We don't see it as the last time that we're going to go to that restaurant, but it really is.
Yeah.
Like it's really the first and last time you're going to go. And do restaurants actually like take that into account? The Business Insider piece talks about restaurants that do. But then they also cover this idea of like, and I've shared this on the show previous times, where I'm making it out to new places a lot less because my wife and I, when we do get a night free, we just go to a place that we love, and we're just going to be a return guest at that place.
It's funny because
And so if
my girlfriend and I have this argument. We just had this last week because I'm like, okay, I know where something's good that I enjoy their cooking. Let's go there. And
Yeah.
she's like, no, I want to try something new. We always go back and forth where it's like, she wants to try stuff
Yes.
new. And I'm like, no, I know that there's a place near me, like 10 minutes away. It's called Entourage. They're just an American restaurant kitchen. And they just have really solid foundational cooking. And that's all I want. And it's like, no, I want to go there. That's it. But, we have to explore.
Well, and just to provide the other side of this and devil's advocate this is, people say, well, Justin, of course it's either going to be first time or they're going to be a return guest. But I think you see iterations of this that kind of try to be both. And the example that I want to give in the hopes of not, like belaboring the show, is like what Carmen does with the chaos menu at the Bear, where every single day the menu is changing because he wants to be like the French Laundry so bad. And, now in season 4, spoiler alert, you have the review saying that there's like culinary dissonance when, like the actual article comes out, because there's such a lack of consistency. And, like at any given night, I think the article talks about the idea that I had 3 different meals going to the same restaurant, or 3 different experiences going to the same restaurant. Yeah. And so that's the counter example of what I'm saying, which is, if this was the first and last time someone was going to come, how would we approach it? And if this is somebody who's going to come 6 times a year, how are we going to approach it? Can you actually have both of those things be fit into the concept in the way that you provide the experience? And so they actually cover a restaurant that we talked about in our last repertoire report together, which is that restaurant in San Diego called Lilo. And the owner says that. So Eric Boast says, we think of Lilo as a celebratory restaurant. Most of the guests are celebrating something. It cannot be a place that is very quiet and reverent and as a meditation on your palate. And then they also talk about this. They have a quote from this gentleman named Giancarlo Pagani, where he's a person at Mother Wolf in LA and Vegas and Miami, where he says, quote, "We're in the business of creating experiences, and you can't sacrifice the experience. The biggest challenge is maintaining that experience without going under." And I think that is the important thing if you're the person who's currently struggling with like, well, we tried this and we did this discount for happy hour and we're trying this late night thing. And it's like you're all over the place. It's like if you just came up with this framework of like, what is the market currently asking for from us right now? And just focusing on that, is there a world where you can find success in a way that is, again, it's surfing the trend. The wave is already here. It's your job not to try to paddle against it or stop the wave or, like try to, like do the Zach Galifianakis math meme and try to come up with something completely new and novel. It's like, this is already happening. How can you just get up on your board and surf the thing? Mm-hmm. The article also talks about, quote, "When wallets are tight, the atmosphere needs to feel worth the extra price." You and I have talked about that in the past with like, it's got to be value for money. And then one last quote that stood out to me was, quote, "When guests walk through the door with specific expectations, you simply can't cut costs to offset rising prices."
Yeah.
Which again, I've applauded in other industry reports that I've covered from friends of the show where people just raise their prices as a strategy and it's like, oh, shocker, that worked.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting, like this idea of the two things, like it does. I do think there's going to be a demand for chefs to diversify how they approach guests. I do think that there's going to be a demand for people to get creative. I just think that though, I worry that, the one answer, like I feel like it's not just one thing. I don't feel like it's just QR menus that you need, or I feel like that's the wrong way of looking about it. I think the original post, they assess the problem correctly, but then they don't really give the solution. Like anyone can say, oh, tech is what you need. Like, of course, any industry can say that. So I wonder, and it would take me some thought to like think about, but like for me, what tech are you talking about? Because is it automation? That's really expensive. The tech I would see is AI and certain tools, and I would see is kind of like social media platforms and whatnot. Like that's the type of stuff. And for me, it's more so like, to your point, I was thinking about Enigma in Spain when I went to Barcelona. Enigma by Albert Adria, and that restaurant blew my mind. There, not only the dining, but it's like I'm never going to come back here again. But I still think about the restaurant on a daily basis, and I don't think I'd ever go there again because I have no need to. So it's like their whole restaurant is built off of like tourists and people coming and visiting them. So every restaurant is different, but at the end of the day, it's really understanding what drives your business, really understanding what you need to like grow it, and listening to your customer base. Because for some people, they might want that online content creation connection that then makes them feel really good about going and buying stuff. I'll give you an example. Like there's a ton of wing places in Buffalo. My favorite spot is Bar-Bill. It's very famous because a lot of Buffalo Bills players have eaten there. They show the games. These two really like niche but popular Buffalo Bills sports podcasters, Matt Bove and Sal Capaccio, will do live podcasts at one of the locations at Bar-Bill. And that tied to just like the Buffalo Bills fan base ensures that every time I go, we have to get there half an hour early because there's a line lined up, because people either they come from Pennsylvania or they come from out of town to try it. And so they're not dealing with traffic loss because they've understood that beyond food, they have to connect to the local sports team. They have to connect to the local culture. And on that street, all these small businesses of like Bills gear or Sabres gear or just Buffalo focused like shops are all there because it shows that they're all coming, into a place where there's a lot of like Bills focused memorabilia or Buffalo focused stuff that people want. So for me, it's not just tech, but really understanding what your customers like about your place and what you can do to tie into your local space or community or that brand to really like exemplify why you deserve their money.
Just really quick to pause on that is for the chefs listening, like that's not a food problem.
No.
And that goes back to the thing that I discussed of like, I had skills that I was lacking is if you're going to step into that, that's why I talk about cook to chef to entrepreneur being the path that you go.
Yep.
Is your ability to cook is not going to achieve that outcome that you just said, Ray, which is getting that relationship built between those podcasters, the relationship with the local sports teams. Like none of that is a food problem to be solved. Mm-hmm. That is not something you're going to fix in the R&D kitchen. It is something beyond that, and that's really hard for chefs to hear because we see, we're brought up with this idea of like Michelin cares about the food and the food only, and that's what gives us stars, quote unquote. And like even that has been like busted from a myth perspective because you have service and you have the atmosphere and you have the wine, the wine program, like all of that stuff just ends up like factoring in, and that's why I have really shifted my own language from talking about like the stuff that I learned on the culinary side to now talking about like the experience level, or more granularly and practically to the concept level. And I think that's what you're talking about with his wing place is like that's a great concept. That as a like vision for what we want this to be, it's very clear, and that clearly shows in the number of guests that they're able to have come out.
I'll tell you another wing story. Let's shout out Buffalo again. A chef I used to work with. He owns this business called Wing Nuts. It was started out. I think he started out in the kitchen. It was just like delivering the wings. Started to go really popular because of like their focus on crunch and juiciness of the sauce and the wings. My coworker here in Illinois goes, "Hey, have you heard of this Wing Nuts place? One of the Bills players was eating at it." He now has like 2 locations opened up simply off of the ability to market himself, market the product, get local people that I'm like to Bill's team, which is essential in the story in my life apparently, as I know. But like that leverage didn't come from just him having a good product. It was his ability to market. And then he didn't know that was going to get some people in Illinois or North Carolina or California seeing his content and wanting to come try it. Like that's the stuff that you're saying. It's tertiary stuff. It's those soft skills that you really need to focus on. And we take it a step further, like back to Line Cook Thoughts, the idea of how you treat your staff, how you build your culture, how you build creativity and whatnot, like that all matters a ton in the success of restaurants. So I don't think yes, you need tech. Yes, you need the forward lookingness. But it's more so your business savvy, your entrepreneurship, and how you're able to work with your team and your ability to kind of cultivate a creative space that I think is way more valuable than any piece of tech you'd bring into a restaurant.
Yeah, so just piggybacking again is that is not a tech problem that you just highlighted. Like it's not a food problem and it's not a software problem. It goes much further than that. Number one. Number two, I love that you talked about some of the stuff that we're covering here, and that's like it feeds right into this subheader that I chose, which is nuance in the gloom.
Yeah.
So it's like we're going to be down and depressed about the state of things, but nuance is actually the way out. You know what I mean? Like we have to be able to take these on a, you read some of these threads, and that's one of the reasons why I think Ray and I love this audio format and the conversation that we can have here, is that some of these people who are giving these broad brush stroke advice pieces, you're going to hear Ray and I talk about like 15 different topics across 6 episodes. Because the reality is like what we want for you is you to take whichever insight aligns most with what you want your concept to be and run with that. Don't take, like this broad brush stroke thing and say, got it. This one person said I need to have QR codes on my menus. And Ray and I are both looking at each other and saying, like QR code menus are like, they're not, all they're cracked up to be.
I'm not telling you to do that. People hate that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just not. And like, what's the counter trend to that? For anybody who's following Ulterior Epicure on Instagram right now, he's doing like every day of the week, he's doing a post an old menu from his archives that he has because he saves hundreds and hundreds of menus. And he's saying, name the restaurant and the year that this is from. And people are like, oh my God, these menus are so gorgeous. And he comments back and he says, this was from a bygone era of when people actually gave a shit on what the, like graphic design on the menus was, and that there was personality in these things. And when it gets all stripped away and you're just met with a PDF that you scan onto your phone, it's like some of that stuff gets lost. And then now you're wondering, why am I losing out to what Ray and I are talking about on 2 weeks ago's show of like Red Lobster's coming along and my customers are going to eat there instead of my restaurant. It's like, well, you've watered it all down and now there's no differentiation here. And you can just be upset because, you caved, you know what I mean? Like you gave in a little bit too much and if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything type of anecdote.
One of my favorite menus is the aviary menu with the birds.
Yes.
If it's like farther out or the distance, the crazier drink. I think I'll save the last story for the solo podcast. I actually want to
cool.
more digging.
Yeah,
I don't
no
want to
worries.
put it hour. So, yeah, I just think it's interesting. I think we dug really deep into those. But yeah, I think overall, if you like the podcast, obviously subscribe on YouTube, hit a like. If you're on podcasting platforms, share. And yeah, Justin, I think that it's going to be interesting. I feel like I'm maybe one of 10 people that waits for the Restaurant Performance Index off the National Restaurant Association's website, but I'm hoping it's out by next week's podcast because I think it's going to be, we saw a lot of economic data with inflation and whatnot in June. I really, really want to see how restaurants are doing halfway through the year. So hopefully get to cover that tomorrow. Not sure what the NRA is doing. Maybe I need to email them and be like, hey, I'm your one reader of this website. Please publish. So we'll see.
Get them to sponsor the show.
Yeah,
like
right.
we can be one of their breaking pieces of food media that comes out with some of the stuff. You're also making me think of the fact that I wrote a piece called having an experience engine in your business on the newsletter.
Yeah.
And it covers a lot of the aspects of what we're talking about here. And it just seems to keep coming up over and over again as a theme. And so you're making me think that I need to do a solo podcast on that concept, just so it's a standalone thing that we can point people to.
Let's do it.
And so if you want to make sure that you get that, please, again, follow Ray's insights and instructions and make sure you're subscribed and rate the show so that this content can also get out to some more folks. Thanks again, Ray.
Yep.